are. We're going to be here now for a while. Soccer. The reason soccer came up like it did is both of our teams. We really didn't think we were going to make regionals, but we got there. Reed's team always does this. It's a very, very good team. A lot of times they tend to underperform during the year, and they get to these regionals, which is when you got teams from all over the nation. Well, this is Southeastern, but teams from everywhere. Phenomenal teams. Most of whom only speak Spanish, by the way. The vast majority. And so it's really, really, I mean, from Miami, from South Texas, places like that, and they got all the way to the, went into a 0-0 time in overtime to get to the Final Four. So they did really, really good. So anyway, so we did that. Come on in here. We are just starting. You hadn't missed a thing. Perfect. Come on in here. Except for the announcements. Anyway, so that's it. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We missed y'all last week, and of course, after Roe versus Wade being overturned, and we couldn't believe that we weren't here to celebrate with y'all, at least to hear something. So we thought we're just going to do it again anyway. So here we go. Roe versus Wade. Take a quick look at this video.
As Chief Legal Officer for the state of Arkansas, that the United States Supreme Court has in fact overruled Roe versus Wade.
Arkansas's Attorney General Leslie Rutledge fighting back tears, announcing she is certifying the state's abortion law. Her signature making abortions illegal in Arkansas, with the only exception being to save the mother's life.
None of us thought today would come in our lifetimes.
A historic warning leading to a day of action in parts of the South and Midwest.
Today is a momentous day.
Minutes after the Supreme Court's decision, Missouri's Attorney General making the state the first in the country to effectively ban abortions.
Today is also a somber day. We remember the more than 60 million innocent lives lost in the wake of Roe v. Wade.
The High Court's decision putting trigger laws in motion in states including Oklahoma.
The most life-saving decision in the history of our nation.
And Louisiana.
If we don't respect the life of the defenseless unborn, how do we expect to respect the life of others who are born?
Tennessee's abortion law goes into effect in 30 days.
It's amazing that this day is here.
In Mississippi,
Roe v. Wade has been a terrible stain on our nation for too long.
the state is banning abortion, with exceptions if the mother's life is at risk, or if the pregnancy is caused by rape and reported to the police.
We fight this battle because we believe in our hearts that it's God's will to do so. To Him be all the glory.
Republicans on Capitol Hill celebrating.
And we're just so thankful for the brave Supreme Court justices and President Trump for nominating them.
And speaking of the former president, he is calling this the biggest win for life in a generation and taking credit for the justices who helped to make this happen. But the New York Times is reporting he is telling a much different story privately, telling advisors and friends this is bad for the Republicans when it comes to winning races in November.
Oh, I thought there was a clip in the corner. Okay, so anyway, I thought, oh, and by the way, yesterday I opened up my mail, and Tate Reeves already raising money on this issue. I did laugh. It's a Tate Reeves thing, and I opened it up. It was like, we've done abortion, but send me some more money. I just laughed. I'm very appreciative of his work. Who did we see the other night? Was that the celebration?
Speaker of the House, Philip Gunn.
Yeah, Philip Gunn was there the other night, and it really, and the funny thing, I got to speak to him he was funny, he was very chatty afterwards. I got to talk with him for several minutes afterwards, and it's interesting how God works in that. He said our legislature is as legislators, as conservative as they are and as pro-life as they are, they were tired of this. 4 years ago, they were tired of it. He said basically we had to strangle them to get them to pass the bill that ultimately took 4 years to get the Supreme Court because they were just tired of it. We don't need one more. We've already done this every time. We always vote for it. The Supreme Court votes no. We're just kind of tired of messing with it. He said, but we did it. And then, of course, it took 4 years. So 4 years ago, they basically had to twist arms to get that law done because they were just fatigued. They were tired of doing it because it took 50 years. So that made me feel even better to hear that from him. He said, now when I go back and we fight some more of these issues, we're going to remind people that, yeah, it took 50 years, so what? you go to work. So anyway, I just thought that was kind of cool.
Meredith, as a baby doctor, do you think we'll overturn the 15 weeks thing?
I think that's very possible in Mississippi.
Well, what I'm wondering, I need to look. The reason they said it was going to I think Mississippi has a trigger law.
Oh,
Which the laws, I think, no, it's not the one that went up. There's a trigger law in Mississippi, but the trigger law itself says it'll go into effect 30 days after Roe versus Wade is overturned. So I think that's what they're referring to. I'm not 100% sure, but I think we have a trigger law, but it doesn't go into take till 30 days, and that's why they're saying Mississippi will be the next one out. Well, I think that's what, I need to verify that, but I think that's what's going on. All right. Oh, do you have any kind of update? Do you need anything from the other night? Or?
No, it was, it was really a wonderful celebration.
It really was.
We had a prayer meeting hosted by our church, just FYI.
Yeah, the Thursday
For
night.
the Center for Pregnancy Choices.
Yep.
It was
y'all
really
know,
exciting.
We won't spend much more time here, because I'm sure y'all talked about it, you could see in the news, but just know, you know. Well, I will say this, we're at the soccer game. It would have been probably Sunday morning, probably 7, 8 o'clock. It was an early game, and we got all our chairs and all our parents, and parents were coming up to Mary, people that we know that are strong Christians. We're talking, in their 30s, 40s, children, somewhat confused about the law immediately, because of course what happened, they were immediately lambasted with nobody will ever get an abortion, and everybody and lambasted with all these, tubules are now going to be considered an abortion, ectopic pregnancies, just crazy stuff.
There are a lot of questions about miscarriages and ectopics, and a lot of information out there that those wouldn't be taken care of, and of course ectopic pregnancy is a life of the mother, life and death issue, and that's just not true.
Yeah, so it was just interesting that right there on the soccer field, you had Christian parents and then going, well, is this true? One came to Meredith and said, I know this isn't right, but can you confirm that for me? The point is, that's why we engage the culture. We need to speak up and turn that kind of stuff around, stop that kind of misinformation. Where's our government misinformation board? Like, oh yeah, they outlawed that thing. That's a joke. You remember the misinformation board that they threw out about 2 weeks after she was announced? I don't know where she is.
What's confusing, just briefly, the term abortion is used medically to mean something different than abortion used non-medically. So abortion I use as the term for loss of a pregnancy. Spontaneous abortion or missed abortion, that's when there's no heartbeat and the baby has died in utero. But that's not a termination.
What you're really talking about is a termination of a viable pregnancy. That's what we mean by abortion. The medical folks use it differently.
Not even just viable.
Yeah.
Not viable.
All right, now here's what's cool. This is what we were tempting y'all with. All right, now we got an interview. We got an interview that we really did not think we were going to be able to get. We're going to show you 4 minutes of an interview. Very, very difficult guest to get. And this is an interview for the reaction. This is the other side. This is a reaction to why they think they lost, and some credit to the folks who've been fighting on their side, on the pro-choice side for the last 50 years. Light okay off there? Yeah. What is it? Well, we just leave the one on, but yeah.
Leave it on.
Off. Yeah, wait, see a little bit stronger. Those sit pretty tough. Yeah, that's a great number.
I want to thank you all for coming down here today. It's not
too you guys see this?
You know, we turned the thermostat down a couple thousand degrees.
This is Satan live from
Hey,
hell.
wait, there, Paul, go back to the beginning. I love it. Even though you gotta listen, let me get the volume up. You gotta listen to every little detail. It is what, y'all know what, now that you've seen the, now that you've seen the thing, what was that? Now that you've seen, this is from the Babylon Bee.
And it says, you can't read it because I have to, Satan addresses Roe v. Wade lost live from hell. Okay.
Live from hell.
I want to thank you all for coming down here today. I hope it's not too hot. You can always turn the thermostat down a couple thousand degrees if I can get some food. These Gel flavors my favorite. As you all know, the team and I suffered a big defeat this week with the overturn of Roe v. Wade. We went out there, we gave it our all. With fantastic offensive game, but ultimately the good guys and Justice Roberts came in clutch. Way better team. So let's take some questions. You there with the teeth.
Satan, it seemed like you had it in the bag with Roe on lockdown for 50 years. What went wrong out there?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. You know, we gotta look on the bright side here. We put up some incredible numbers. Over 60 million PBAs, that's preborn babies aborted for the layperson. It's an absolute world record. Yeah, I can't take all the credit though. This is a team sport. And you got an incredible team. You know, got Planned Parenthood, Moloch, Nancy Pelosi. Y'all made this possible. It didn't go the way that we wanted this time. But in the end, We still have a championship team of demons, devils, and Democrats out there, and there's always mixed.
Excuse me, the devil, what are your plans for the health franchise going forward?
Excellent question. Obviously, this is a rebuilding year for us. We're gonna build back better. And we have some great up-and-coming prospects. We got Kamala Harris. You've heard her demonic cackle. Of course, it's one of the best in the game. It scares you and me sometimes. Of course, we got all the progressive Christians out there. We got the guy from Green Day. We got Pink now, and of course the Republicans with the weak defensive game. So thanks, Mitch. They let us remain dominant, killing babies for over 50 years. And let's not forget, we still have California and New York in the bag, putting up incredible numbers in the child sacrifice department.
Anything else you can tease for the fans out there?
Well, let's see. Well, while abortion game will be down for a while, we've got some great stuff lined up. So we're going to be rolling out another Amy Schumer comedy special.
I don't know what that is.
That's good. We got an even flimsier paper straw debuting next year. And we're putting more extremely long, unskippable cutscenes in video games. You know, the ones with the sudden QT sequences where you gotta mash X or you instantly die. Have to watch the whole thing again. That's a classic. Don't count us out. Anyway, I gotta make an appearance at a family-friendly drag show in Texas. No more questions, okay? This press conference is over. And Beelzebub, release the bees.
Wait, what?
Bees?
That's right on the. That's right.
There's so many people helped us through the years. Margaret Sanger, Alyssa Milano, shout out to my homegirl, Michelle Obama out there, thanks for the support. See Jen Hatmaker, Rachel Hollis, the absolute GOAT, Kermit Gosnell, pretty much every Hollywood actor, except for that guy who played Fraser, Joe Biden's handlers, all the Republican congressmen who got their mistresses pregnant, and the ladies from my favorite television show of all time, The View. Oh, and Steve.
A green team. All right. We picked that one. It was just funny. We looked at and the issue is so heavy and so dark and so. But there's also a celebration, and that's what Babylon Bee does, is you look at that and you go, yes, it's funny, yes, they're poking shit, but there is so much truth in that. That's what I like about Babylon. That's what satire is. It may be humor, but there's a ton of truth sitting there. Anyway, we just thought that was pretty funny, and I hope y'all would enjoy that. But the point I actually take from that, I wrote it down. The point that I really take from that is it's a satire. Sports used as a satirical analogy of the real battle. There's a real battle, and the battle, in a sense, he's right. Do you think we've defeated Satan and the demonic world in this? Absolutely not. Not only we defeated the regular human world because, like you said, the abortion's going on all day long in Tennessee. In California and in New York, and all this did was kick it to the state. That's literally all it did. It kicked it to the states. Now it's a 50-state battle instead of a one battle at the Supreme Court or in the federal government. That's really all it did. So the battle is just getting started. So my only admonition is, please don't think for 2 seconds, oh, good, we finally pushed abortion off the list. We can move on to something else. Maybe prayer in school now. No, abortion will be hot and heavy for a long, long time. Matter of fact, it's now just getting started. It's almost like with the reversal of Roe versus Wade. Imagine the horse race. The gate just opened and the horses are now running. The horses weren't even running. The federal courts, through conservatives and Christians, I'm mixing all of my analogies. They threw us, locked our hands behind our back. We were just standing behind the gate. Now the race has started. The race has actually started. Now it's a 50-state race. So just keep that in mind. It's nowhere near over, not even close to over. You got something in there?
I was just gonna say, I just remember that someone asked me, who's a Christian, well, what do you do with all this controversy and practice and all? I was thinking about it, we were talking about it over all of this weekend. It's really a quality of life issue, right? We say, who gets to decide what the quality of that life is? Whether they're gonna, so the pro-choice it's not a dialectic again, it's a continuum. The pro-choice advocates believe The quality of life is decided by the mother, and she can decide whether that life is worthy of living. And then I was like, well, where do you draw the line? Christians say in utero, non-Christians say, later in life. And even Christians say later in life. For instance, Joel Charleston was the son of a mother who was a single parent, who had no spouse available and no college education, and very by herself financially. She also had one kidney. She was told she should abort him. So,
But you shouldn't have any more babies.
by the world standards, she was the person to have an abortion. Did his life matter? Does his life matter?
I didn't know she was using me as an example.
So it's a quality of life issue, and we believe we're image bearers. We are created in God's image no matter what. We have another friend who graduated high school. You know, people say the life of the mother, and that is a hard decision. We have another friend who graduated high school with Joel, and I take care of her daughter now. And she had, I can't remember her exact diagnosis, but it was a pulmonary diagnosis. It may have been pulmonary hypertension for my medical friend over there. But anyway, she was told she would die. Her cardiac output.
Well, first thing is, I mean, this is incredibly rare. So the whole idea of life of the mother is in a tiny sliver of abortions, but this is an actual case of one.
Of course, she was pro-life, and she, long story short, was pregnant, not planning, accidentally, and she gave her life for that child. She died postpartum time period because her heart couldn't manage that. But I see that daughter now, who looks so much like her mother, by the way. And I think, you know, her mom decided that her life was valuable.
I knew this mother in high school, and good Southern Baptist girl in South Jackson, and didn't surprise me one bit that she made that decision, because she knew from an early age where she stood.
Anyway.
I didn't know we were gonna go into all that. All right.
You're gonna hit these companies.
Oh yeah, well I won't. Just know this. Y'all hear this going on right now. This is what we were throwing out a few things just to remind you the battle's still going on. Immediately companies say, we'll pay for your travel. So this is just a list of companies. I'm not advocating some boycott or something, because I just don't know how I can boycott about half of these. No, I'm kidding. All I'm saying is just be aware. We need to be aware.
We think it's ironic that you can get an abortion voucher from your company,
yes,
but you can't get an education voucher for kids to go to better schools.
Yeah, can't get an education voucher, we'll give you an abortion.
So where's the quality of life there?
But the funny thing is, and some of them will tell you this, some of the economic folks will tell you this. If any of you see any clips about the economics behind this, oh yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah, they would, a company like this, a massive company, do you have any idea what a mother who gets pregnant and has a baby costs a company? It costs them tens of thousands, 20, 30, 40 thousands of dollars, extra time off, the cost of the medical care, adding that child to insurance. They'd much rather give you $2,000 to abort that child. And that is actually a discussion that's going on. If you look at the business side of this, it's ridiculous.
I mean, I can tell you,
this right here, this is a business decision.
Give up a huge amount of money, because if I don't work, I don't eat. I don't take
You don't
home
produce.
money. So it's based on my being there. So when I take off to have children, any of my partners have children, it's a huge amount.
It makes me angry, because these folks will run around patting themselves on the back, pretending, well, their publicists will, Google and PayPal, all that. Look how woke we are. No, this is a business decision. That costs that company millions and millions. When you think about some of these people have 20, 30, 40,000, many more employees. Yeah, they would, but abortion is far cheaper than putting that child on their medical insurance. Anyway, that makes me angry.
I was gonna get y'all's take on Roe versus Wade was passed in '73. It was overturned in 2022. Look at the numbers, that's 49 years.
A jubilee. Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Isn't that interesting?
I didn't calculate that.
I hadn't thought about that.
Cool.
It's a jubilee where all things return back to its original state, its original ownership. That's interesting. Don't know if I've gotten in it that way, but that is cool.
The pro-choice says backwards, we're going backwards.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that. Very good. All right. That's all right. Anybody else want to say anything about pro-life, that stuff?
I have a question for Meredith. So what about the abortion pill?
what are they doing, what are they doing with that?
Well, there's not necessarily one abortion pill per se. You can use regular birth control pills to delay ovulation, and that doesn't really bother me. Some people feel differently about that, if you're delaying ovulation. There's a pill that I use for a miscarriage and induction of labor. It's a prostaglandin that makes you contract and all that, and that's available. I've seen some things about some of the pharmacies stopping the, I don't know exactly how they can, because these medicines are used for other things, I guess it's.
Well, I guess
So
what
there's
they're
not.
doing is they're gonna make it an outlaw to prescribe it for any other reason. other
Yeah,
than
but
normal medical
pharmacists
reason.
don't have a right to say what I prescribe it for. They don't know what the reason is that I
Well,
want
they
to.
don't, it'll still happen, but when somebody hears about it,
They might prosecute me.
Yeah, they prosecute
So
you.
I don't know how that's gonna work, honestly, because there's a lot of scare tactics in the media, but there's not like one abortion pill. Well, like, those aren't even legal, like in RE 486 or whatever it was. So, anyway.
We'll have to do a little more research on that, but,
There are things that cause abortions, miscarriage, things to happen that we also use for miscarriages. So, and I do a DNC surgery, which is also is a way to do abortions. So surgery and medicine, there's a lot of overlap. So I don't think that will just be outlawed,
Which really, I've heard people say, they describe it this way, is in a sense, technology has outpaced the whole abortion debate since 1973 because of pills and medications you take. And that is true. I mean, and not to mention just the culture so much. If we had not allowed abortion to go legal in 73, you had a culture who was vastly more Christian, vastly more Judeo-Christian worldview and ethic. Our world would still, I mean, in other words, there's been a lot of damage, because now what's happened now, you've outlawed abortion, well, all you have is half the population screaming, fine, we'll go to California. So my point is, while it was a big victory, it wasn't as big as it would have been obviously way back in 1973, and it's different because of the medications you can take to have an abortion. So the point is, abortion will never be stopped through legislation, period. Am I happy? Absolutely. Would I like to see more? Because anything that's harder to get is more likely to not happen. That's why he shouldn't be for legalizing marijuana either. But that's a whole other issue. Or pornography, or any of that kind of stuff, because it's damaging to human beings or whatever. And access to it feeds those addictions. But anyway, that's a whole, God, we are so off subject.
Yeah.
But my point is, abortion will only be ultimately eliminated, reduced, it'll never be eliminated, will only be reduced by Christian, godly people ministering to individual women and families, one-on-one, day by day in their culture. It's never changed. It's never gonna change. That's always gonna ultimately be you with your girlfriend who gets pregnant and is scared. That relationship with a godly Christian is what'll stop abortion. That's the truth. And so in that sense, that fight has never changed, and it's not going to change.
You know, I've been posting some stuff on Facebook. My wife's trying to keep me to be civil when I do that, because I get so emotional attached to this. But talk about all the people who are waiting to adopt babies. And a friend of mine from high school typed in and says, well, I see this orphanage where these 36 kids load on this bus every day, and who have no families. What do you think about that? I said, why don't you ask them whether they rather been aborted or not?
That's
Great
right.
point.
And
That's right. And another example of enemies within the church, last week we heard a seminary professor saying you shouldn't have white people adopting black children.
This is the whole critical race theory into our
that
church.
it's not fair to those children to be adopted by a white family. And I look at, my patient is married to the Broadmoor pastor, and Josh Brady, and he stood up last week and talked about this. Actually, their service made national news for Mississippi.
Wow.
But his family is that. I mean, they
Adopted
adopted two
African-American.
little African-American girls, I think. No, one boy
One
and
boy and one girl.
And that is the example of God's family adopting in children. And at the foot of the cross, like we said, Revelation 5, every tribe and nation and people and group
And you have
like,
such a massive, to your point, you have
Yeah.
a massive waiting list for excuse me, not a waiting list to be adopted in the African American community. The white community is different. In the African American community, they cannot find enough people to adopt them. How dare you look at any other race and say you can't have this child for some race theory concept? That is ridiculous. That could not be any further from a biblical understanding of race, love, compassion, whatever you want to call it. That could not be any different. That makes me angry. The other night at the celebration, in the far left back, there was a white couple with a beautiful black child. And I turned to the mirror and I said, "You look at that. That pastor we were listening to 2 weeks ago would hate that." And I'm sitting there, they're loving that child. That little child the dad was holding him, and at some point she turned, y'all seen babies do this. She turned and reaches both hands out to mama. She wanted mama at that moment. And I thought, that child couldn't care less what color her mom is. That makes me angry.
The issue we gotta deal with now is how to make adoptions more affordable.
Yes.
You know, instead of paying to have an abortion, why don't you put a little price tag on a baby saying, this baby comes with $15,000 worth of adoption cost.
Yes.
You know, if these companies would do that.
Yes.
We gotta get it to where it's affordable, then these babies would have places to go, but in the African community, you know, they, like African, you know, Americans, they can't afford to pay $35,000.
Right.
You know?
Maybe that's what, and this is totally weird all the time. I keep thinking about how as a church, I'm talking about our church, First Baptist Church and other church, how should we engage? Maybe that's what we ought to be doing over the next 2 years, 3, is starting funds where we pay for that. Maybe we ought, maybe Christians should be paying for that. Maybe we ought to be raising 100, 200, 300 million, $5 million, and we offer to pay for any adoption. That could be something churches ought to be doing.
We have doctors and lawyers.
Heck yeah.
You can't tell me you can't vet a person in 3 weeks. You know, if this person got you know, my son, my daughter, and my son both adopted children. It takes almost a year to adopt somebody.
And that's America.
Yeah.
What about international is even longer, yeah.
So it's crazy. You know, you can vet someone, and you know, it's not gonna be perfect every time, as you know, nothing's perfect. But you can get that thing done and get these kids in homes where they're not lining up to go on a bus at 8 years old and 9 years old.
One of our labor and delivery nurses took home a baby, a crack baby, unreferred. And there was no vetting with that. You just got what you got.
That's happening more, and there's some other situations in your office, not no names, but.
Not very much.
But that,
anymore.
where it was, not as much,
It's
but
too
where it was a
complicated.
private
Legally-
adoption kind of thing.
Legally, it's too complicated, like you said, it's really.
Wow.
I love these conversations. This is not just, oh, we're anti-abortion, we're actually pro-life, because it doesn't stop us when the person has to have a baby. It turns to, we have to help come along beside people and take care of the family altogether. Because that's what the first generation of the church looked like. You had the Roman Empire with all their decadence and horrible, they'd have babies, instead of, they didn't have abortions, they just left them on the side of the road themselves.
That's right. And
And
Christians
Christians
would
would
go pick
come
them up.
along, they had specific places they would drop these kids off to. Christians would patrol those areas and pick them up, take them home and raise them.
Christians were
That's-
pro-life from
that's
the moment.
That's the view that we need to be having.
I love that. I wish more people would tell that
And
story. That's a
honestly-
beautiful story that I didn't realize, I forget, years ago, I heard someone tell that, so I really, that first century Roman Christian, that's what they would do. They would go collect those babies and bring them in.
Honestly, also, it's not just adoption, it's, you know, in the foster care system, they say, they always want the baby to stay with the parent if possible, a parent or a family member if possible. And I mean, I understand that if it's a safe situation, we need to be coming alongside them. Single moms, you know, there were people along the way in his household and.
From the church,
And
always.
then we try to be that now. You can make an impact on some family's life who is, you know, struggling now and avoid this second generation problem, you know, down the road. So it's not only taking those babies, but also supporting families that are what is God's perfect family unit? It's that core mother, father, children, and even if it's single parent, God still wants to institute that family.
And it does make me mad. It makes me so angry, because you heard this week when they would grab a person who was angry about abortion being outlawed, or Roe v. I don't like saying abortion being outlawed. Abortion was not outlawed. Roe versus Wade was overturned. And the first thing out of their mouth is because you Christians don't care anything about them the minute they're born. That first of all, that is blatantly false. You look at any register, anywhere, do any Google search you want, I guarantee you over 90%, if not closer to 100% of every orphanage, every adoption agency, all of those things. Guess what they all are? They're all Christian based, all of them. And so that's just that has never been true. And the problem is we too often let that group control the narrative. That's what, if you remember back in our study, our 16-week study for Engage the Culture, one of those weeks where I talked about, I understood Jerry Falwell and the religious right back then. What happened though is that the media and the left controlled the narrative, that they were able to paint them so restrictive, and that narrative has been alive for about the last 20 or 30 years, since the 80s. And that's what you hear when these folks pop up. You hear, y'all are just evil Christians, moralists, they don't care about anything else, you don't care about people. So that narrative is out there, and it is blatantly false. Any review, like I said, from adoption agencies to foster homes, whatever, it's blatantly false, and we got to quit letting that be out there. That is not true.
They went to be protesting at the Catholic churches.
Yeah, that's right. Good point. Good point. All right. Anything else on the plots?
One more.
Yeah.
Another nitpick on. There's a friend of mine is involved in getting a house. You may know about it, Meredith, the Yellow House. They're trying to get a grant to get this house, to create a household for unwed mothers. Anyway, it's down in your Battlefield Park. But so that's what we need to do, is get involved and.
And also the Crisis Pregnancy Center, strong Christians there.
Right, and I'm working on an idea for our class. What can we do?
Maybe this.
Yes, maybe that, or, but I'm just getting in touch with some people this week just to find out some things that we can do, like bringing supplies, having and maybe different Sunday school classes in the church take different months, or something that we can do to be supportive, and because that's the thing, we have got to step up.
We do. We will have nobody to blame but ourselves if we don't take this opportunity to minister to those women and their born children. Yeah, I completely agree. Do not give that group that narrative any longer. Anyway, I totally agree. Meredith, we're gonna tour the Center for Pregnancy Choices. We're gonna tour it soon, and after we do that, it might be maybe we could also do that. Have anybody who wants to in this group go tour it. We'll go first, kind of see what it is. But and just tour. What do they do? What do they do? How do they counsel these women? What do they do? So we'll go check that out. All right.
Don't forget that this is always going to be a narrative about sin and selfishness at the very root too. It's not always going to be a debate on the merits of any real argument. And so I'm not saying that there's not people out there that can be reached with the real argument, but the vast majority of people that are putting out the narrative that Christians don't care, they're not going to be convinced that you do. They're just looking for a way to justify their own selfish desires, which is to set aside that life in pursuit of their own.
Yeah, that's very true. Very good point. That's true.
We can't legislate sin. Sorry, we can't legislate sin, but also one good thing we say about what happened is it took their hiding place away. They can't hide behind Roe versus Wade. They actually have to try to make an argument for why they think they're doing it. So at least that opens up that conversation.
It's exposed a lot of evil. I mean, they've come right out and shown, just like the Tucker Carlson clip.
Yeah, they drop the pretense.
Yeah.
And they're not just trying to give some logical argument. Now it's just, forget you, I want to do this. It's become just, what you just said, this is, I always say this, I minored in political science at Bill Saps. Of course, Bill Saps is very liberal, so most of your professors were very liberal. I love y'all probably talked about Dr. Bavender before, I love him. But anyway, and one of the things, one of his preaching things was you can't legislate morality. So we're in political science class, he's talking about not legislate, and I looked at him and I thought about it, and I just stood up in the class, a whole bunch of it, I said, that's not true. I said, no, what I said was it. I said, this is a little 19-year-old, I was probably maybe 20. And I said, said, no. I said, yes. I said, you can't legislate morality. I said, you can legislate a change in morality. He stopped and looked at me funny, so I realized I must have said something he hadn't heard. And now you hear that. I said, you can't legislate morality, but you can legislate a change in morality. And he said, what do you mean? I said, slavery. I said, slavery. A majority of people were just fine with slavery. We demanded that it change. We legislated it. We could not change individual hearts. But over the generations now, you won't find virtually anybody who will say slavery is just fine. We legislated a change in morality. You didn't legislate their hearts. You let that generation die. But you can legislate a change in morality all day long over time. And hopefully that's part of what's happening here. You're right. You can't change a person's heart, but you can change generationally the thinking of how people see the world.
Those that love sin really love to use the shield that you can't impose your morality on other people, but yet the whole world is just people doing that in every single interaction. So, I mean, like in every law that's passed, that is what we're doing. That's where we're
somebody's morality is being
curbing someone's behavior.
Somebody's.
Yeah.
Yep. Very good. Great discussion. I said glue, so we're thinking, well, we missed it last week. No, we'll just do it again. Anything else on that? Should we get to Colossians? Oh, did you? Oh, I think we should get your glasses. All right, you want to get to Colossians? Now, here's the cool thing about Colossians. In Colossians, we were looking at this, and I just love Colossians. A lot of scholars believe it's the high point of Scripture. You'll have some scholars who just say it's the pinnacle because it's the supremacy and the sufficiency of Jesus Christ. It's who he is. So you get a lot of scholars who just love this small book from Paul and consider it the utmost in Scripture, for lack of a better term. And I agree, it's just a beautiful book, incredible book. But what was kind of cool is Meredith and I started looking at it, is we started realizing, wow, how much of it goes right along. It was a good transition for what we just finished doing. We just spent 16 weeks looking at how to engage the culture. Oh, by the way, I know we had a lot of people out 2 weeks ago when we did the last week of engaging the culture at the Black Road Regiment. All you guys were at your, on at the beach, the mission field, and all that good stuff.
The beach.
I didn't think I just went. That's kind of our ski trip mission field.
I was laughing because it was a beautiful picture of the beach. I'm like, that's my kind of mission trip.
Hey, there are people that need Jesus on the beach.
That's right.
I like it.
I'll take you next year.
Do you want to give us a second of how it went?
A report.
It was actually such a blessing to be a part of it.
To lead it.
Yeah. God is funny. What can I say about that? He actually already had me have videos for next year. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm not 3 to 1. Anyway, but some of the things, the whole point is to move people closer to knowing Christ and then discipling them afterwards, not just leaving them there, because that's not what's supposed to make disciples. It's like, go therefore and make disciples.
Thank you. We're going to talk about that today. Yes.
That's the strongest
one it could be.
But some of the kids, like I got to talk to a 6-year-old who didn't really get it, but I was like, you know what, it's planting seeds. But we had one member of the group had 9-year-olds, and it was a day to share the gospel, and she was sharing the gospel, and some of the kids were like, hey, can we go play on the playground? She goes, yeah, you can. You don't have to sit here. 4 to 5 of those 9-year-old boys decided to stay and listen. And if you remember, a 9-year-old boy does not sit and sit when there's a giant playground behind you.
They're looking for a reason to leave.
In front of you. Yeah. So that was such a blessing just to know. One of them got hurt and had to go home, and the lady was like, well, there's the enemy trying to attack. But then one of those boys signed up for the camp that was the next week. So just seeing God continue to move there and continue to make those was such a blessing.
Are there kids from local or all over the country?
There were kids from local, and then there were also some kids that I think were not local. They might have been from a couple towns over. We also had one kid, her grandmother was from Venezuela. He got to come one day. He did. It was fun. I hadn't heard Venezuelan accent in a long time. And so it was really awesome to see God move, not just in the children, but the people He brought up to us. There was a guy from Cuba who just kind of walked up. And then there was one of the workers was from Ecuador. And so just to be able to see God move not only among the children, but among us as well, was such a blessing. And I was so thankful to be a part of it.
Awesome.
And was Bart handy and helpful?
Yes, did Bart do anything? Or John?
Bart was amazing. There was like one day he'd be doing games, sunburned all on his legs. The next day he's in the water, phone doesn't work. The next day he's like, whatever, I'll be back at games. We He was such a team player. I was right there.
You just go where you're told on this one, Sheriff.
Yep,
You don't have questions, you just
go
follow
where you're
the
told.
leader.
Oh my goodness.
Great pictures too. I took a picture of me and it makes me look like a real surfer girl, so. That was hard to come.
Very
So
good.
worth it, not just for the gospel, but for the surfer cut. Yeah.
Well, we missed you guys 2 weeks ago. So anyway,
Yeah, we
but-
missed,
yeah, and then we missed last week. So but you did get to hear about the Black Robe Regiment and kind of the challenge that ended the culture. So finally last night, Meredith goes, you never uploaded the study for that. I was like, oh, you ever saying that? It's been 2 weeks. So anyway, I finally uploaded it last night. So if you missed the last Engage in the Culture deal, it was uploaded last night. So y'all can check it out. What's that? Are y'all having a conversation
Yes,
over
we
there?
are.
Okay.
Teacher,
All right.
teacher.
What time is it? Because I bet
It's like 10:03.
10:03. Okay, we're just gonna do it. Here's the good news. This week I won't have to. We won't have to spend much time doing notes because we're basically just gonna pick these up next week. But I will do just a little bit. Maybe you want to just do the video. Well, yeah, do the well. Hold on. Let's see. Let me see. Let me go back and look at my notes. I can do this first part. Well, let me think here. Okay, all right, because my notes, if I start reading them, I'm gonna have to rewrite stuff for next week. So, all right, here's what we're gonna do, and then we'll end a little bit early this hour. We're gonna do the Bible Project video. Y'all, we've used this yet, so I know you love these. The Bible Project does a wonderful, anytime you're about to read a book, they just do a good job. And again, it's not massively theological, they're not doing it, but they're just giving you 5 minutes of an overview of a book. And they do a good job of that. So here's the Bible Project's overview of Colossians. We'll watch that and then we'll call it quits, and I won't have to read your notes this week.
It was written during one of Paul the Apostle's many imprisonments for announcing Jesus as the risen Lord. And the letter's addressed to a group of people that Paul had never met, who made up a church community that he didn't start. This church in Colossae was started by a co-worker of Paul's named Epaphras, who was actually from that city. And Epaphras had recently visited Paul in prison, and he updated him on how well the Colossians were doing overall, but he also mentioned some of the cultural pressures tempting them to turn away from Jesus. And so Paul wrote this letter to encourage the Colossians to address the issues that Epaphras had raised, and then to challenge them to a greater devotion to Jesus. The letter's design and flow of thought are pretty easy to follow. The opening movement focuses on Jesus as the exalted Messiah. Paul then goes on to show how his suffering in prison is for the exalted Jesus. And then he addresses the pressures tempting the Colossians to turn away from Jesus. After this, he explores the new way of life that Jesus' resurrection opened up for them. So the letter opens with 2 prayers. Paul first thanks God that he learned from Epaphras that the Colossians have been totally faithful to Jesus, showing love for God and their neighbors, all because of the hope they have in the new creation that Jesus has in store. And so he moves on to pray that they would grow in their wisdom and understanding about Jesus. And then Paul has placed a poem here to help the Colossians and us do exactly that. It's the centerpiece of chapter 1, a poem all about the crucified and exalted Messiah. It has 2 parallel stanzas, and it's crammed with language and imagery from the books of Genesis and Exodus, from the Psalms and the Proverbs. The first stanza explores how Jesus is the true image of God. In him, the full character and purpose of God is embodied in a human. He's the firstborn, an Old Testament phrase about Jesus' royal status over all creation. He shares in the very identity of the one true creator God. And by him, all reality, all powers and authorities, spiritual and human, have been created. It's in Jesus the Messiah that we discover the very author and king of creation. And so in the second stanza, we discover he's also the one bringing about a new creation. He's the head of a new body, which refers to Jesus' people, who are the new humanity, of which his own resurrection existence is a prototype. In him, God's glorious temple presence dwells. And so it's through Jesus' death and resurrection that God has reconciled himself to humanity, to all spiritual powers, to all of creation. It's a remarkable poem, and Paul will keep referring back to it as he goes on in the letter. So he first shows how the truth of this poem transforms his own experience of suffering in prison. He's being punished for announcing to the Greek and the Roman world that Jesus is the resurrected Lord and King of all. And so his suffering, he thinks, is not a sign of defeat. It's actually his way of participating in Jesus' own suffering done as an act of love. And so his hardships are actually a cause for joy. He's imprisoned for the surprising news that Israel's resurrected Messiah is creating a new multi-ethnic family. And more, just as the divine glory dwelt in Jesus, so Jesus dwells in and among his international family. Or as Paul says, the Messiah is in you all, the hope of glory. Paul then addresses the cultural pressures that are tempting the Colossians to turn away from Jesus. They were confronted by a combination of mystical polytheism along with a pressure to observe the laws of the Torah. So all these new Christians, they had grown up worshiping the various Greek and Roman gods who governed different arenas of human life. And many simply concluded Jesus as one more deity that they could worship. There was also great pressure from the Jewish Christian community for these non-Jews to complete their commitment to the Messiah by following all of the laws found in the Torah. Specifically, he mentions eating a kosher diet, observing sacred days, and circumcision. It's very similar to the problem he addressed in the letter to the Galatians. For Paul, to give in to either of these temptations is compromise. It's a failure to grasp who Jesus really is and what he did on their behalf. The Colossians used to live in fear of spiritual powers and elemental spirits, as Paul calls them. But Jesus triumphed over these through his death and resurrection. He freed the Colossians from any obligation to them. In the same way, Jesus fulfilled on our behalf all of the laws of the Torah, which never had the power to transform the selfish human heart anyway. And so what Jesus did in his life and death and resurrection, it lacks nothing. It doesn't need to be supplemented by following the laws. He is the reality to which all of the laws of the Torah were pointing anyway. Instead of the laws, followers of Jesus have the power of his resurrection to change them, which is what he goes on to explore. Following Jesus means joining his new humanity, because their lives have now been joined to the risen Jesus' life. And this is why Paul challenges the Colossians to set their minds on things above, where the Messiah is seated or rules at God's right hand. Now, Paul doesn't mean here, think about how you'll one day leave earth and go to heaven. Rather, the heavens are the transcendent place from which Jesus rules now over all of creation. And from there, he will one day return here to transform all things. Or, as Paul says, when the Messiah who is your life is revealed, you too will be revealed with him in glory. So Paul challenges them to live in the present as the kinds of new humans they will one day become. He uses the image of their old humanity, characterized by distorted sexuality and destructive speech. For Christians, that humanity died with Jesus and has been replaced by his own new humanity, which is characterized by mercy and generosity, by forgiveness and love. And this humanity, it transcends the ethnic and social boundary lines of our world to create, in Paul's words, a people where there is no one Greek or Jewish, circumcised or uncircumcised, slave or free, but the Messiah is all and is in all people. Paul then gets really practical, and he shows the Colossians what this new humanity might look like in a first century Roman household, which was a highly authoritarian institution where the male patriarch held the power of life and death over his wife, children, and slaves. Not so in a Christian household. Here, the risen Jesus is the true Lord. And so, in the Lord, the wife allows
Paul was
her
the first
husband to
feminist.
become responsible for her. And the husband is subject to Jesus by loving his wife and placing her well-being above his own. In a home where Jesus is Lord, children are not objects, but are called to maturity and to respect. And parents are to raise their children with patience and understanding. Christians who are slaves are to honor their human masters, precisely because they're not the real master. Jesus is. And Christians who have slaves are to understand that this slave is not their property, but rather a fellow member of Jesus' body to be honored and embraced in love. Paul's walking a very fine line here. He is reshaping the most basic Roman institution around Jesus, who rules by his self-giving love. And so while he doesn't abolish the household structure outright, the exalted Messiah demands that it be transformed, almost beyond the point of recognition for any Roman living in Colossae. You can see this most clearly in the letter's conclusion. After a request for prayer, Paul applies these instructions about Christian slaves and masters. And we discover that Tychicus is the one carrying and reading this letter to the Colossians. And he's accompanied by a certain Onesimus, who was a former slave to a Colossian Christian named Philemon. And we discover from another letter addressed to Philemon that Onesimus had escaped from his master. It was a crime worthy of imprisonment. But Paul asks the whole church to greet Onesimus as a faithful and beloved brother in the Lord. And then in the letter to Philemon, Paul says that he should receive Onesimus no longer as a slave, but as a brother. Talk about ending the letter with a punch. So in the letter to the Colossians, Paul is inviting us to see that no part of human existence remains untouched by the loving and liberating rule of the risen Jesus. Our suffering, our temptation to compromise, our moral character, the power dynamics in our homes, all of it must be re-examined and transformed. We are invited to live in the present as if the new creation really arrived when Jesus rose from the dead. And that's what the letter to the Colossians is all about.
Is that not incredible? I just think, I look at that because you could get Paul's writing is, you know, he's thinking on a whole other level. I love Paul's writing, but you can get lost in it when you just kind of read a book on your own, and that's helpful to me because you go, wow. Think about the last 14 weeks, the last 16 weeks. We talked about, think about what you have. You have people demanding, you know, whether it's like I said a minute ago, feminist or patriarch. You have all that garbage in there, and you realize that 2,000 years ago, Paul, through Jesus Christ, through Paul, was restructuring the entire family, and everything that our postmodern culture wants is found in Jesus, but they refuse it because what's also found in Jesus is responsibility. And they don't want to be responsible to God. So they reject that, but it's all found right there. And it's just beautiful. Again, that may not be theological, but it gives you a wonderful view of, wow, what was Paul doing in 4 simple chapters? That's a lot of stuff. All right, what time? We got to get out of here. All right, dear Lord, thank you so much. We do thank you one more time for overturning Roe versus Wade. May we be inspired and stay faithful to keep working and to see that come all the way through to where abortion is no longer desired by anybody. So it really doesn't matter whether it's legal or not. And Father, thank you, and help us figure out and help us know how to approach Colossians and get out of it over the next few weeks exactly what you would have us. In Christ's name.